The motorcycle hit the wet asphalt at 40 miles per hour, chrome and leather exploding across Marcus Chen's quiet street like a bomb going off. Through his kitchen window, he saw the rider's body tumble across the pavement, blood already pooling beneath the twisted metal. Marcus ran his fingers through hair that had gone gray too early, counting the pills in the amber bottle on the counter. 17 left. At $60 each, they might as well have been made of gold. The construction site where he'd worked for 6 years had laid off half their crew last month, and jobs were scarce. The sound of Emma's laughter drifted through the thin walls, pure as church bells, and Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. She was building castles out of mud and broken dreams, her pink rain boots splashing through puddles that reflected a sky the color of old bruises. How do you tell a child that the only home she's ever known is about to disappear? How do you explain that sometimes good people lose everything while the world keeps spinning, indifferent to their pain? Marcus pulled on his worn leather jacket and stepped into the drizzle. "Come on, princess. Let's get you dried off before you turn into a fish." Emma's face lit up like a Christmas morning. "Daddy, look what I made!" She pointed to an elaborate mud sculpture that looked like it might have been a dragon or possibly a very sad horse. "It's a castle for the fairy people. Mom used to say they lived in the rain." In the empty space beside him in bed, where Marcus would sometimes reach for her in the drowsy moments between sleep and waking, only to grasp cold air and the memory of jasmine perfume. "Mom was right about a lot of things," Marcus said, scooping Emma into his arms. She was getting too big for this, all elbows and knees, but she still fit perfectly against his shoulder. "Now let's get some hot chocolate in you before you turn into a fish." The house felt smaller each day, as if the walls were slowly closing in. As Emma changed into dry clothes, Marcus stared at the framed photo on the mantel, their last Christmas together, all three of them wearing matching reindeer sweaters that Sarah had insisted on. Emma gap-toothed and giggling, Sarah radiant, even as the cancer was already whispering in her cells, and Marcus looking like a man who thought he had all the time in the world. If he could step into that photograph, warn that younger version of himself, what would he say? Save more money? Spend less time at work and more time holding the people who mattered? Love harder, faster, like there wasn't always tomorrow? 29 days until eviction. The notice had been fluttering against their fence for a week, another reminder that medical debt from Sarah's cancer had destroyed everything they'd built. But right now, watching this kid bleed out in the street, Marcus forgot about bills and late notices and the impossible weight of being a single father drowning in debt. Marcus rushed to the window and saw a motorcycle lying on its side in the street, its rider sprawled motionless on the wet asphalt. Without thinking, he bolted through the front door and into the rain. The kid couldn't have been more than 16, all leather and attitude until the pavement had humbled him. Blood seeped through a tear in his jacket, and his leg was bent at an angle that made Marcus's stomach lurch. The motorcycle was a beast of chrome and engine, the kind of machine that belonged to people who lived by different rules than suburban single fathers. As Marcus knelt beside the injured boy, he noticed the patch on the back of the leather jacket, a skull with wings, surrounded by words that sent a chill down his spine. Hell's Angels MC. "Easy, son. Don't try to move." Marcus pulled out his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed 911. The boy's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. My bike," the kid whispered, his voice barely audible over the drumming rain. "Forget the bike. You're hurt bad." Marcus shrugged out of his jacket and pressed it against the worst of the bleeding. "What's your name?" "Tyler Hoffman." The words came out in ragged gasps. "My dad. He's gonna kill me." Marcus had heard the name Hoffman whispered in the dark corners of their town's bars and diners. Danny Hoffman, president of the local Hells Angels chapter, a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. Stories of bar fights that ended in the hospital, of debts collected with brass knuckles, and a code of honor that existed somewhere between medieval chivalry and frontier justice. "Easy. Your dad can wait. Right now we need to keep you breathing." Marcus could hear Emma calling for him from the house, her voice high and worried. He looked back at their small home, then down at the bleeding boy in the street. Some decisions change everything, creating ripples that spread far beyond their moment of origin. This was one of those crossroads where ordinary people stumble into extraordinary consequences. The ambulance arrived 8 minutes later, though it felt like hours. As the paramedics loaded Tyler onto a stretcher, the boy grabbed Marcus's wrist with surprising strength. "You saved my life," Tyler said, his eyes suddenly clear and focused. "I won't forget that. Neither will my family." Marcus watched the ambulance disappear into the gray afternoon, red lights painting the wet street like spilled wine. He stood there long after the sound of sirens faded, something electric humming in the air around him. Emma appeared at his side, slipping her small hand into his. "Is the boy going to be okay, Daddy?" "I think so, Princess. I hope so." That night, after Emma had fallen asleep clutching her stuffed elephant, Marcus sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills and broken promises. The eviction notice seemed to mock him from across the room. He opened his laptop and started typing another job application, the words blurring together like everything else in his life. Seeking dependable workers, extensive experience in construction and general labor, references available on request. Please, he wanted to add, please give me a chance to save my daughter's childhood. Please let me have enough. The knock on the door came at exactly 9 o'clock. 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through the walls. Marcus peered through the pee-hole and felt his blood turn to ice water. 5 motorcycles were parked in his driveway, their riders standing in formation like leather-clad sentinels. The man at the front was built like a mountain, with arms thick as tree trunks and a beard that could house small birds. This had to be Tyler Hoffman. Marcus opened the door with the chain still attached, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Can I help you?" "You Marcus Chen?" Danny's voice was surprisingly soft, like gravel mixed with honey. "The man who pulled my boy out of the street today?" Yes. How is he, Tyler?" "He's gonna live, thanks to you." Danny's eyes, pale blue and sharp as winter, studied Marcus with an intensity that made him feel transparent. "Mind if we come in? Got some things to discuss." Every instinct screamed at Marcus to keep the door closed, to protect Emma from whatever these men represented. But there was something in Danny's tone, a note of respect that caught him off guard. Slowly, he unlatched the chain and stepped aside. The 5 men filled his small living room like giants in a dollhouse, all leather and denim and the lingering smell of motor oil and danger. Danny removed his bandana, revealing a scalp mapped with scars and stories Marcus could only imagine. "Tyler told me what you did today, how you didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions, just jumped in to help a stranger." Danny's gaze swept across the eviction notices scattered on the table, the past-due bills, the general air of a life coming apart at the seams. "He also told me you got a little girl upstairs." Yes. See, we got a code. Someone saves the life of one of ours, especially my son, well, that creates a debt, and we always pay our debts. You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone would do. No, son. Most people would have called 911 from inside their house, kept their distance, minded their own damn business. You got your hands bloody. You stayed with him until help came. That means something in our world. Marcus glanced toward the stairs, praying Emma would stay asleep just 20 feet away, separated from these hardened men by nothing but drywall and prayers. "Look, I appreciate you coming by, but nothing." Danny leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My boy could have bled out in that street while good people peeked through their curtains and minded their own damn business. You're the only one who stepped up. That makes you family now, whether you like it or not." The word family hung in the air, like incense in a cathedral. Heavy with meaning Marcus couldn't begin to unpack. These men lived by rules he didn't understand, in a world that existed parallel to his own suburban struggles. What could they possibly want with a single father who couldn't even pay his mortgage? "I'm not sure what you're asking of me," Marcus said carefully.
Danny's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "We're not asking you anything, brother. We're telling you that the Hell's Angels don't forget their friends. And right now, it looks like you could use some friends." As if summoned by some invisible signal, the other men began filing toward the door. Danny was the last to leave, pausing in the doorway like a mountain deciding which way to fall. "Get some sleep, Marcus. Tomorrow's going to be a different kind of day for you and your little girl."
Marcus stood in his doorway long after the sound of motorcycle engines had faded into the night, watching 5 sets of taillights disappear like falling stars. The rain had stopped, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for whatever came next. He touched the eviction notice, still taped to the fence, its edges now soggy with rain and possibility. 28 days had seemed like a countdown to disaster. Now, somehow, it felt like the beginning of something entirely new. Marcus woke at 5:30 to the sound of rain hammering the roof like impatient fingers. The dream was already fading. Sarah laughing in their old kitchen, sunlight streaming through windows that weren't boarded up, Emma's toys scattered across carpet that wasn't threadbare and stained. For a moment, the warmth of that phantom life lingered, then reality crashed back like cold water in his face. He padded to the window, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and froze. The motorcycles were back. 6 of them this time, arranged in his driveway like sleeping beasts. The riders stood under the eaves of his garage, steam rising from coffee cups clutched in leather-gloved hands. Danny Hoffman caught sight of him at the window and raised one massive hand in greeting. "Daddy!" Emma's voice drifted from the hallway, small and confused. "There's loud men outside." Marcus pulled on yesterday's jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better decades. "Stay upstairs for a few minutes, Princess. Daddy needs to talk to some people." "Are they the police? Are they here about Mommy the medicine money?" The question hit him like a punch to the solar plexus. Emma knew. Somehow, despite his efforts to shield her, she understood that their world was built on borrowed time and empty promises. At 8 years old, she was already learning that love couldn't pay bills and good intentions couldn't fill prescription bottles. "No, sweetheart. Just some friends checking on us. Go brush your teeth, okay?" Marcus opened the front door to find Danny holding a thermos the size of a small building. The other men had formed a loose semicircle in the driveway, their presence both protective and intimidating. These weren't the Hollywood caricatures of bikers, leather-clad thugs with switchblades and attitudes. These men carried themselves with military precision, their eyes constantly scanning for threats, their body language speaking of brotherhood forged in fire and tested by time. "Mornin', Marcus." Danny's voice carried the gravelly weight of too many cigarettes and late nights. "Brought coffee. Figured you might need it." "I don't understand what's happening here." Marcus accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma of coffee that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget. "Yesterday you said something about family, about debts. I'm not sure I will follow." "Walk with me." Danny gestured toward the backyard, where Emma's mud castle had survived the night's rain. "Let's talk man to man." They stood in the gray morning light, 2 fathers separated by worlds, but connected by something Marcus couldn't yet name. Danny studied the small yard with the attention of a general surveying a battlefield. The broken fence, the patchy grass, the swing set that Sarah had insisted on buying the month before her diagnosis. "Tell me about your wife," Danny said quietly. The request caught Marcus off guard. "Sarah? What does she have to do with any of this?" "Humor me." Marcus stared at the mud castle, remembering Sarah's hands covered in flour, her laugh filling their old apartment kitchen. She was everything good in the world. What happened? "She fought cancer for 18 months. The medical bills destroyed us financially. Mortgaged the house twice. I worked double shifts, took on weekend jobs, and sold my father's coin collection. None of it was enough." Danny nodded as if he'd heard similar stories before. "And now you're drowning in medical debt, about to lose the house, can't afford your daughter's medication." "How do you know about Emma's medication?" "Because I make it my business to know about the people who matter to my family.
And you matter now, Marcus. You saved my boy's life. That creates bonds that can't be broken. Marcus felt a surge of something between gratitude and fear. I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't know what you expect from me. I'm not like you. I don't live by your rules. My rules? Danny's laugh was like thunder rolling across distant hills. What do you think my rules are? I don't know. Violence, crime, the kind of life my wife would never want Emma exposed to. Danny was quiet for a long moment, watching a cardinal perch on the broken fence. Let me tell you what our rules actually are. Loyalty above all else. Protect your family, no matter the cost. Stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. Never back down from a fight if it's worth fighting. And always, always pay your debts. He turned to face Marcus directly. Your wife sounds like she lived by similar principles.
Sarah never hurt anyone. Neither have most of us, unless they hurt someone we cared about first. We're not what you see in the movies, Marcus. We're mechanics and construction workers, veterans and fathers. We just happen to ride motorcycles and wear leather. The sound of a window opening made them both look up. Emma's face appeared at her bedroom window, her hair wild from sleep, her expression curious rather than frightened. "Hi, Mr. Big Man," she called down to Danny. "Are you a friend of my daddy's?" Danny's entire demeanor shifted, his voice becoming gentle as velvet. "That's right, little darling. Your daddy did something very brave yesterday. We wanted to thank him." Emma's face lit up. "Daddy's always brave. He kills the spiders in my room and makes pancakes shaped like butterflies and tells the scary thoughts to go away when I can't sleep." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Emma, go get dressed for school." "But I want to meet the motorcycle friends." "School first, princess." After Emma disappeared from the window, Danny looked at Marcus with something like respect. "She's got your wife's spirit. And Sarah's stubbornness. The good kind of stubborn. The kind that doesn't quit, even when quitting makes sense." Danny pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a photo of a boy in a hospital bed, bandaged but smiling. "Tyler wants to meet you properly, when he's feeling up to it." "How is he, really?" "Broken ribs, fractured femur, concussion, but he's young and he's tough. The doctors say he'll make a full recovery." Danny's voice carried the weight of fatherly relief. "Could have been so much worse if you hadn't gotten to him when you did. The paramedics said another 10 minutes and he would have bled out." Marcus remembered the pale look in Tyler's eyes, the way his hands had shaken as he pressed the jacket against the boy's wounds. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, they wouldn't have, and that's what makes you different. He gestured toward the house, where the other men were now helping themselves to coffee from a thermos one of them had brought. "These guys, they've all been where you are. Jimmy over there lost his house after his daughter's leukemia treatments. Tank went bankrupt when his wife needed surgery they couldn't afford. Rico worked 3 jobs to keep his family afloat after his back injury." What happened to them? We happened to them. That's what family does. We take care of our own. And now you're our own, whether you realize it or not. Marcus watched Emma appear in the kitchen window, carefully measuring cereal into a bowl. She was growing up too fast, taking care of herself in ways that broke his heart. Last week, he found her doing homework by candlelight because she was trying to save money on the electric bill. 8 years old, and already carrying burdens that should have been his alone. "I can't accept charity," Marcus said quietly. "I won't raise my daughter on handouts." "Who said anything about charity?" Danny's grin was sharp as a blade. "You think we got where we are by giving things away for free? No, brother. Everything has a price. Everything requires payment." "What kind of payment?" "The kind your wife would approve of. Community service, you might call it. There's plenty of work that needs doing, and you got skills we can use. Construction, maintenance, helping people who need help. Legal work, Marcus. Nothing that would put your daughter at risk or compromise your principles." The sound of a school bus rumbling down their street made them both turn. Emma would need her backpack, her lunch money, her medication for the day. the small rituals of childhood that Marcus clung to like lifelines, proof that he could still provide something resembling normal for his daughter. "Think about it," Danny said, heading back toward his motorcycle. "But don't think too long. Clock's ticking, and we don't like to see family suffer when there's no need for it." As the motorcycles roared to life and pulled out of the driveway, Marcus stood in his backyard watching Emma's mud castle slowly dissolve in the morning rain. The cardinal was still perched on the broken fence, its red feathers bright against the gray sky. Sarah used to say cardinals were messages from heaven, reminders that love persisted even after everything else fell apart.
"Daddy, the bus is coming!" Emma's voice carried through the thin walls of their small house, urgent and excited. She still believed in the magic of school days and new discoveries, still trusted that tomorrow would somehow be better than today. Marcus hurried inside to help her gather her things, to kiss her forehead and promise that he'd be there when she got home. As he watched the yellow bus carry his daughter toward another day of learning and friendship, he wondered if Danny Hoffman might be offering something more than charity. Maybe it was a chance to become the kind of father Emma deserved, the kind of man Sarah had believed he could be. The eviction notice fluttered against the fence, a reminder that some deadlines couldn't be negotiated or wished away. But for the first time in months, Marcus felt something stirring in his chest that might have been hope. It was fragile and uncertain, like the first green shoots pushing through winter soil, but it was real. He pulled out his phone and stared at the number Danny had pressed into his palm before leaving. One call could change everything. One decision could alter the course of their lives in ways he couldn't imagine. But doing nothing was also a choice, and that choice led to a cardboard box on the curb and his daughter learning that sometimes love wasn't enough to keep the wolves at bay. The phone rang twice before Danny answered. "I was wondering when you'd call." "What exactly are you offering?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with the steadiness of his own voice. "A future, brother, for you and your little girl. But we do this right, and we do this together. Can you live with that?" Marcus looked at the mud castle in his backyard, at the broken fence, at the eviction notice that had defined his nightmares for too many sleepless nights. Then he thought of Emma's laugh, of Sarah's unshakable faith in human goodness, of the way Tyler Hoffman's eyes had cleared when he promised that his family wouldn't forget. "I can live with that," Marcus said. "Then welcome to the family, brother. Real family this time." As Marcus ended the call, he felt the weight of fear lifting from his shoulders like fog burning off in morning sunlight. There would be consequences to this decision, complications he couldn't foresee, challenges that would test every principle Sarah had instilled in him. But there would also be hope. And for a man who had been drowning for so long, hope was worth any price. The cardinal took flight from the broken fence, its wings catching the wind as it soared toward whatever waited beyond the gray horizon. Sarah used to say that every ending was just a new beginning in disguise. Standing in his backyard with the rain washing his face clean, Marcus finally understood what she meant. The first job came 3 days later, arriving with the rumble of motorcycles at dawn. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, coffee growing cold in his hands, watching Danny Hoffman dismount from his Harley like a general surveying a battlefield. The other men followed suit: Tank, Jimmy, Rico, and 2 new faces Marcus didn't recognize. They moved with the coordinated precision of soldiers, but their destination wasn't a war zone. It was the Henderson house, 2 blocks over, where old Mrs. Henderson had been struggling with a roof that leaked like a sieve since her husband passed last spring. "Morning, brother," Danny called as Marcus stepped onto his front porch. The eviction notice was gone, replaced by something Marcus still couldn't quite believe: a paid-in-full receipt from the mortgage company, stamped in official red ink. 26 years of payments wiped clean with 1 phone call, 1 decision to trust in the kindness of dangerous strangers. "I thought you said this was about earning our keep." Marcus gestured toward the receipt. "This feels like family taking care of family, which is exactly what it is. But if it makes you feel better, consider it in advance. You'll work it off, trust me, starting today." Marcus had spent the better part of 3 sleepless nights wrestling with the implications of what he'd accepted. Every instinct Sarah had instilled in him screamed warnings about debts that couldn't be repaid in dollars, about obligations that might demand pieces of his soul he wasn't prepared to give. But Emma's laughter from the backyard, her voice raised in play without the undercurrent of worry that had shadowed her for months, made every doubt seem small and selfish. "What exactly are we doing at Mrs. Henderson's?" Marcus asked, pulling on the work boots that had carried him through a dozen construction sites. "She's been trying to get contractors out there for 8 months. They keep giving her estimates that might as well be ransom notes. Meanwhile, she's got buckets in her living room and mold growing in her walls. 78 years old, and these vultures want to charge her $12,000 to fix what any decent roofer could handle for 3.
Mrs. Henderson emerged from her house wearing a housecoat and an expression of bewildered gratitude. She was a tiny woman, all sharp angles and silver hair, but her eyes held the kind of strength that came from surviving 8 decades of life's curveballs. "I don't understand," she said to Danny, her voice wavering between hope and suspicion. "I never called for any service, and I certainly can't afford—" "Ma'am, you don't owe us anything, except maybe some of that lemonade I hear you're famous for." Danny's voice gentled to the tone he'd used with Emma. "Consider this a gift from the neighborhood." "But why? I don't even know you boys." Marcus found himself speaking before he'd consciously decided to. "Sometimes people help because it's the right thing to do." Mrs. Henderson's eyes filled with tears that she quickly brushed away. "Your wife sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. The work consumed the morning, 6 men moving in harmony born of shared purpose. Marcus found his rhythm quickly, his hands remembering the weight of hammer and nail, the satisfaction of building something that would last. This was honest work, the kind that left calluses and sore muscles, but also the deep contentment that came from creating order out of chaos. It was just before noon when the trouble arrived. The sedan pulled up slowly, its black paint gleaming like an oil slick in the autumn sun. 2 men emerged, wearing suits that cost more than Marcus made in a month and expressions that suggested they'd rather be anywhere else. The one in front was tall and lean, with the kind of pale complexion that spoke of too many hours spent in fluorescent-lit offices. His companion was broader, his jacket straining across shoulders that had seen the inside of more gyms than boardrooms. "Gentlemen," the tall one called, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "I'm going to need you to cease this work immediately." Danny didn't look down from the section of roof he was securing. "And you are?" "Thomas Brennan, HND Properties, LLC. This property is under contract for acquisition, and any improvements made without authorization constitute a breach of our agreement." The words hit Marcus like cold water. Henderson Properties. He'd seen that name on documents scattered around town, always in connection with houses being bought for fractions of their worth, elderly residents being pressured to sell to faceless corporations that promised easy money and worry-free futures. Mrs. Henderson's face went pale. "Mr. Brennan, I told you I needed time to think. I haven't signed anything." "Mrs. Henderson, we've been more than patient. The offer expires today at 5 o'clock. Any improvements you make to this property before then will simply reduce our final offer accordingly." Brennan's smile was as sharp as broken glass. "I'm afraid these gentlemen are wasting their time." Danny's hammer stopped mid-swing. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus had seen that look in the eyes of soldiers who'd been pushed one step too far. It was the moment when reasonable men decided that reason had failed them. "You want to run that by me again?" Danny's voice was soft, almost conversational, but something in it made Brennan's companion shift nervously. "The property is under contract. Any unauthorized work stops now or will be forced to pursue legal remedies." Danny set his hammer down with deliberate care and began his descent from the roof. Tank,
Jimmy, Rico, Crow, and Blue followed suit, moving with the same coordinated precision they'd shown all morning. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, recognizing the signs of a situation spiraling toward violence. "Mrs. Henderson," Danny said, never taking his eyes off Brennan, "did you sign any contracts today?" "No, I told Mr. Brennan I needed more time. My grandson is coming this weekend to help me review the papers. So, as of right now, this is your house, your property, your decision who works on it." Brennan's jaw tightened. "Mr. Hoffman, Danny Hoffman." The name hit Brennan like a physical blow. Marcus saw recognition flare in his eyes, followed quickly by calculation and fear. Whatever reputation the Hells Angels carried in this town, it was enough to give even corporate predators pause. "Mr. Hoffman, H&D Properties is a legitimate business operating under full legal authority. We don't want any trouble here." "Neither do we, which is why you're going to get back in your car, drive back to whatever hole you crawled out of, and give Mrs. Henderson the time she asked for to review your offer properly."
Brennan's companion whispered something urgent in his ear. Marcus caught fragments. "Not worth it. Lawyers, call the cops." The bureaucratic bravado was evaporating like morning mist. "This isn't over," Brennan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mrs. Henderson, you'll be hearing from our legal department." "She'll be hearing from ours first," Danny replied. "Amazing how many lawyers owe favors to the Hells Angels." As the sedan pulled away, Mrs. Henderson began to cry. Not tears of fear, but of relief so profound it seemed to shake her entire frame. Marcus found himself at her side, offering his handkerchief and the kind of comfort he'd learned to give when Sarah's illness had left them both drowning in impossibility. "I've been so scared," she whispered. "They've been calling every day, sending letters, making it sound like I had no choice. My grandson lives in Seattle, and I didn't want to worry him, but I didn't know what to do." "You did exactly right," Danny said, his voice returning to its gentle register. "And now you've got 6 witnesses who saw them trying to intimidate you. That's not how legitimate business gets conducted." The roof was finished by 3 o'clock, sealed against weather and time with the kind of craftsmanship Marcus hadn't seen since his father's generation. Mrs. Henderson insisted on making lunch for everyone, producing a feast from ingredients that seemed to multiply in her hands like something from a fairy tale. They ate on her back porch, 6 dangerous men and 1 elderly woman, sharing stories and laughter as if they'd known each other for decades. But the confrontation with Brennan had changed something in the air. Marcus could feel it in the way the other men's eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, in the tension that lingered beneath their easy conversation. They'd crossed a line today, moved from simple charity to active resistance against forces that wouldn't accept defeat gracefully. "This Henderson Properties," Marcus said to Danny as they walked back to the trucks. "How big an operation are we talking about?" "Big enough. They've been working this neighborhood for 2 years, buying up properties for half their worth, then flipping them to developers, mostly targeting elderly folks, people who don't have family nearby to help them navigate the legal maze. What they're doing is technically legal, but it's about as far from right as you can get. And now we've made ourselves a target. Brother, we made ourselves a target the day we decided that family meant something. The question is whether we're going to let bastards like Brennan intimidate good people like Mrs. Henderson, or if we're going to stand up and do something about it." That evening, Marcus sat in his backyard, watching Emma chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The cardinal was back on the fence, its red feathers darkened by twilight, but still visible against the weathered wood. Sarah's presence felt especially strong here, in this space where her daughter still believed in magic. "Daddy, look!" Emma's voice was breathless with wonder. She cupped her hands carefully, a soft glow emanating from between her fingers. "I caught one!" "That's beautiful, princess!" But fireflies are happiest when they can fly free. Emma opened her hands and watched the insect spiral upward into the darkening sky. "Like butterflies in heaven with Mommy?" The question caught Marcus off guard, as Emma's innocent observations often did. "What do you mean, sweetheart?"
Tank told me that good people become butterflies when they go to heaven, so they can still visit the people they love. Do you think Mommy is watching us right now?" Marcus felt his throat tighten. Tank, the massive biker with arms like tree trunks and a voice like distant thunder, had taken a particular shine to Emma during the day's work. Marcus had watched the giant man carefully explain the proper way to hold a hammer, his huge hands guiding Emma's tiny ones with infinite gentleness. "I think if heaven exists, then yes, Mommy is definitely watching us. And I think she's very proud of how brave and kind you are." Emma settled beside him, on the steps, her head finding its familiar place against his shoulder. "Do you think the motorcycle friends are going to come back tomorrow?" "I think so. Why?" "Because I like them. Tank said he'd teach me how to whistle really loud, and Jimmy said he knows where the best fishing holes are. They're not scary like I thought they'd be." "What did you think they'd be like?" Emma was quiet for a moment, watching fireflies dance among the trees. "On TV, the motorcycle people are always mean and loud and they hurt people. But these ones fix roofs and drink lemonade with old ladies. Tank even said please when he asked if he could use our bathroom."
Marcus smiled, despite the weight settling in his chest. Emma's observations were heartbreakingly accurate. The men who'd spent the day repairing Mrs. Henderson's roof bore no resemblance to the Hollywood stereotypes that had shaped his own expectations. They were fathers and workers, men who understood that strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. But they were also men who lived outside conventional society's rules, who'd made enemies of people with power and resources. By accepting their help, by joining their ranks, Marcus had pulled himself and Emma into a world where conflicts were settled through means the suburban father in him couldn't fully comprehend. The phone rang inside the house, its shrill tone cutting through the evening quiet like a blade. Marcus almost let it go to voicemail, reluctant to break the peaceful moment with his daughter. But something about the urgency of the sound made him rise and answer. "Marcus Chen?" The voice was unfamiliar, clipped, and professional. "This is Marcus." "Mr. Chen, this is Detective Ray Martinez with the County Sheriff's Department. I need to speak with you about your activities today." "What kind of activities?" "There was an incident at 427 Maple Street involving alleged intimidation and threats. Several witnesses have come forward with concerning allegations." Mrs. Henderson's address. Of course, Brandon hadn't let it go. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Detective. We were doing some volunteer roofing work for an elderly neighbor." "Charity work." Martinez's voice carried skeptical weight. "With the Hells Angels, men with records that include assault, drug trafficking, and racketeering." "I wouldn't know about their records. I know they spent their own time and money helping an elderly woman who needed a roof. And I suppose it's just coincidence that this woman was being pressured to sell her property to Henderson Properties, that your new friends happened to target a situation that would put them in direct conflict with a legitimate business." The pieces clicked into place like bullets sliding into a chamber. This wasn't about Mrs. Henderson's roof. It was about territory, about power, about forces Marcus was only beginning to understand. Henderson Properties wasn't just buying houses. They were systematically dismantling a community, and the Hells Angels had positioned themselves as the last line of defense. "Detective, are you arresting me for something?"
Martinez studied him for a long moment. "Not today. But Mr. Chen, you need to understand what you've gotten yourself into. These men aren't your friends. They're criminals who use people like you as shields, as ways to legitimize their operations. And when things go bad, and they will go bad, you'll be the one left holding the bag." After the police cars disappeared, Marcus sat on his front steps feeling like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. Behind him lay the safety of conventional life, a world where problems were solved through proper channels, where good people trusted in systems and authorities. Ahead lay something darker, but perhaps more honest, a realm where justice was earned rather than assumed, where protecting the innocent meant accepting the burden of being dangerous. The sound of a single motorcycle broke the afternoon's quiet. Tyler Hoffman pulled into the driveway, moving carefully but with determination. The boy looked older than his 16 years, his face marked by pain but also by something harder, a recognition that childhood was a luxury he could no longer afford. "Hey, Mr. Chen. Heard you might need a friend right about now." Marcus stood slowly, studying the young man who'd inadvertently changed his life. "Shouldn't you be in the hospital?" "Discharged this morning, against medical advice, but I've got things to do." Tyler's smile was sharp as his father's. "Besides, figured you might want to know what you're really dealing with here." "Which is?" "War, Mr. Chen. Henderson Properties isn't just buying houses. They're working for people with a lot more power and a lot less conscience. And now that you've chosen to side, they're going to come after you with everything they've got." Marcus felt the weight of that truth settle on his shoulders like lead. He thought of Emma upstairs, innocent and trusting, and wondered if saving one boy's life was worth risking his daughter's future. But then he remembered Mrs. Henderson's tears of gratitude, Danny's gentle voice explaining honor to Emma, and Tank teaching his daughter how to whistle. Some battles chose you whether you wanted them or not. The only real choice was whether to fight standing up or on your knees. "What do I need to know?" Marcus asked. Tyler's smile widened, transforming his battered face into something fierce and proud. "Everything, Mr. Chen. And we better start right now, because they're coming for all of us, and they're not planning to play fair." As storm clouds gathered overhead and the first drops of rain began to fall, Marcus Chen realized that his old life was over. Whatever came next would be earned in fire and tested by forces that would either forge him into something stronger or break him completely. But for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The war for his neighborhood and his soul was about to begin. 6 months later. The community garden bloomed where Meridian's casino was supposed to stand. Marcus watched Emma plant flowers in the spot where their eviction notice had once fluttered against the fence. The cardinal returned to its perch, red feathers bright against the morning sky. Mrs. Henderson waved from her perfectly repaired roof. Tyler rode by on his motorcycle, healed and strong. Danny's deep laugh carried from the garage where he taught neighborhood kids about engines and honor. "Daddy," Emma said, soiled dark under her fingernails, "the flowers are for Mommy, but the garden is for everyone." Marcus smiled, understanding that Sarah's greatest gift wasn't the love she'd given them, but the courage she taught them to protect that love in others. Their guardian angels had wings of leather and hearts of gold, and their family, biological and chosen, was finally, truly safe. The revelation came at 3 in the morning, delivered by Tyler Hoffman in Marcus's kitchen while Emma slept peacefully upstairs. Tyler spread documents across the scratched Formica table, property records, corporate filings, bank transfers that painted a picture so vast and corrupt it took Marcus's breath away. "Meridian Development Corporation is just the front," Tyler said, his voice still rough from his injuries but steady with conviction. "The real power behind this is Meridian Development Corporation. They're not just buying up individual houses, they're systematically acquiring entire neighborhoods to clear the way for a casino resort complex." Marcus studied the papers, his construction background helping him understand the architectural plans Tyler had somehow obtained. The proposed development would stretch for 12 city blocks, obliterating not just houses, but the elementary school where Sarah had taught, the community center where Emma took art classes, the small businesses that form the heart of our neighborhood.
"This is impossible," Marcus whispered. "The city would never approve something like this. There are zoning laws, community input requirements." "There are also city council members with gambling debts, a mayor facing bankruptcy, and a planning commission that's been systematically bought and paid for over the past 3 years. Tyler's finger traced connections on a flowchart that read like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Meridian doesn't just want to build a casino, they want to own the entire local government that regulates it. The scope of the corruption was staggering, Marcus recognized names from the documents: the bank president who'd been so eager to foreclose on his mortgage, the city inspector who'd condemned Mrs. Henderson's roof as structurally unsound just weeks before they'd repaired it, the real estate agents who'd been pressuring elderly residents with lowball offers and dire warnings about neighborhood decline. "How did you get all this?" Marcus asked. Tyler's smile was sharp as broken glass. "You think the Hells Angels survived this long by playing by other people's rules? We've got friends in places you wouldn't expect, and enemies who don't realize we know who they are." He leaned back in his chair, wincing slightly from his injuries. "The thing is, Mr. Chen, this isn't just about money. It's about power. The kind of power that can make families disappear if they become inconvenient." "What do you mean?" "Remember the Morrison family? Lived over on Oak Street? Had that big German shepherd that barked at everyone? They were fighting the sale of their house, threatened to go to the newspapers about Henderson Properties' tactics." Marcus nodded. The Morrisons had vanished 6 months ago, their house sold at auction after they'd supposedly defaulted on their mortgage and fled to parts unknown. "They didn't leave voluntarily," Tyler said quietly, "and they're not coming back." The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought of Emma sleeping upstairs, innocent and trusting, and felt something cold and murderous unfurl in his chest. "You're saying they were killed?" "I'm saying they became inconvenient to people who make inconvenient problems go away. The kind of people who don't care if you're a good father, or a loving husband, or someone who just wants to live in peace. The kind of people who see human beings as obstacles to profit margins." Marcus stood and walked to the window, staring out at the street where Tyler crashed his motorcycle what felt like a lifetime ago. The neighborhood looked peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness, but now he could see it differently. Not as a collection of homes where families built their lives, but as a battlefield where forces of greed and power were systematically destroying everything that mattered. "What does your father want from me?" Marcus asked. "The same thing you want. To protect the people who can't protect themselves. But also something more. You saved my life, Marcus. In our world, that creates bonds that go deeper than law, deeper than convenience. You're family now, whether you want to be or not." "And if I don't want to be?" Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "Then you pack up Emma and run, tonight, before they realize how much you know and decide you're too dangerous to leave alive." The choice hung in the air between them like smoke, visible and inescapable. Marcus thought of Sarah's last words in the hospital, her hands gripping his with surprising strength as she made him promise to keep their daughter safe, to raise her with the values they'd shared, to never let the darkness of the world extinguish the light in Emma's eyes. But he also thought of Mrs. Henderson's tears of gratitude, of the other elderly residents who were being systematically terrorized into abandoning their homes, of the Morrison family and whatever happened to them in some room where screaming wouldn't be heard. "If I stay, if I help, what exactly are we talking about? What would you need me to do?" Tyler's expression grew serious. "Legal things first. You're clean, Marcus. No record, solid reputation, the kind of person judges and juries trust. We need someone who can gather evidence that will stand up in court, who can speak for the community without the automatic prejudice my father and his brothers face." "And illegal things?" "We need someone who can get close to the people behind this. Someone they wouldn't suspect, who could document their activities, maybe even wear a wire if it came to that." Tyler's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And if it comes down to protecting innocent people from monsters who use murder as a business tool, well, we need someone who understands that sometimes good people have to do hard things to stop evil from winning." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling Sarah's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. What would she want him to do? She dedicated her life to protecting children, to standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. But she'd also made him promise to keep Emma safe above all else. The sound of footsteps on the stairs broke his reverie. Emma appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep, clutching the stuffed elephant that had been her constant companion since her mother's death. "Daddy, I heard voices. Are you okay?" Marcus felt his heart break and rebuild itself in the space of a single heartbeat. His daughter stood there in her princess pajamas, trusting him to keep her world safe and comprehensible. And he realized that he'd been thinking about this all wrong. This wasn't about choosing between Emma's safety and the community's welfare. The truth was that Emma would never be safe as long as people like Meridian Development Corporation were allowed to destroy communities and eliminate inconvenient families. "I'm fine, Princess. Tyler here was just telling me about some grown-up stuff. Why don't you go back to bed?" Emma studied Tyler with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Are you the boy who crashed his motorcycle? Daddy said he helped you." "That's right," Tyler said, his voice gentling in the same way his father's had. "Your daddy saved my life. That makes him a hero." "I know that already," Emma said matter-of-factly. "He's been my hero forever." After Emma had gone back upstairs, Marcus and Tyler sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Marcus spoke. "What do you need me to do?" Tyler's smile was like sunrise after the longest night of the year. "First, we need to get you somewhere safe while we plan this out. Meridian knows you're connected to us now, and they're not going to wait for you to become a bigger threat." "I'm not leaving, Emma." "Wouldn't ask you to, but there's a place where both of you can stay while we figure out our next move, somewhere they'll never think to look." An hour later, Marcus found himself packing a suitcase while Emma slept, trying to decide which of their possessions were worth saving if they never came back to this house. The photos of Sarah, certainly. Emma's favorite books and toys, the quilt Sarah's mother had made, the ones that still smelled faintly of lavender sachets she'd sewn into the corners. Tyler waited in the living room, making phone calls in a language that mixed English with code words Marcus didn't recognize. The plan was simple in outline, terrifying in implication. They would spend the next few days at a safe house while the Hells Angels gathered intelligence on Meridian's operations. Then Marcus would surface as a community activist, someone organizing resistance to the development project through legal channels while secretly documenting evidence of the corruption and violence. It was the kind of plan that could save the neighborhood or get them all killed, possibly both. The safe house turned out to be a farmhouse 20 miles outside town, surrounded by fields of corn that rustled like whispered secrets in the morning breeze. The place belonged to Rico's sister, Maria, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hands that spoke of years spent healing rather than hurting. She welcomed Marcus and Emma as if they were long-lost relatives, fussing over Emma's breakfast and showing her where the barn cats liked to be scratched behind their ears. "She's beautiful," Maria said to Marcus as they watched Emma chase chickens in the farmyard. "She has your eyes, but her mother's spirit. I can see it in the way she moves through the world, like she expects it to be good to her. Her mother was the best person I ever knew. Emma deserves to grow up in a world that's worthy of that expectation. Then we'll make sure she gets that chance." The work began that afternoon. Danny arrived with a box of legal documents and a laptop computer, transforming Maria's kitchen table into a command center that would have impressed military strategists. Tank and Jimmy followed with surveillance equipment and weapons that Marcus tried not to think too hard about. "The beauty of this," Danny explained, spreading out maps and photographs, "is that we're going to beat them at their own game. They're counting on intimidation and corruption to clear the path for their development. But corruption leaves evidence, and we're going to gather every piece of it." Marcus studied the photographs. City council members accepting envelopes from Meridian representatives, construction permits being processed without proper inspections, bank records showing suspicious transfers of funds. The pattern was clear once you knew how to look for it. "How long have you been working on this?" Marcus asked.
3 years, Danny said. "Ever since they started targeting our neighborhood. See, people like Meridian think bikers are just criminals they can ignore or eliminate. They don't realize that some of us are veterans, some of us have college degrees, and all of us understand that family is worth fighting for." "What changed? Why involve me now?" Danny's expression grew serious. "Because they escalated. The Morrison family wasn't the first, but they were the most visible. And because after Tyler's accident, I realized that this fight was going to cost us people we couldn't afford to lose. We needed someone clean, someone they wouldn't suspect, someone who could move in circles where we'd never be welcome." Over the next 3 days, Marcus received an education in urban warfare that no university could have provided. He learned how to document conversations without being detected, how to recognize surveillance, how to create false identities that would stand up to casual scrutiny. More importantly, he learned about the network of families and small businesses that formed the real heart of their community. People who'd been quietly resisting Meridian's pressure for months without realizing they weren't alone. The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity. Marcus would surface as the leader of a grassroots organization called Citizens for Neighborhood Preservation, ostensibly focused on legal challenges to the development project, but in reality, he'd be gathering evidence of Meridian's criminal activities while coordinating with other resistance groups throughout the city. It was Tank who voiced the question they were all thinking. What happens when they figure out what you're really doing? These people don't just fire you or sue you. They make you disappear. Then we make sure they disappear first, Danny said quietly. We document everything, we protect our people, and if they cross the line into murder, we cross it right back. The law doesn't protect families like ours. We protect each other. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a recognition that the man he'd been, the suburban father who believed in systems and authorities, was gone forever. In his place was someone harder but perhaps more honest, someone who understood that justice was earned rather than assumed. That evening, as Emma played with the barn cats and Maria prepared dinner, Marcus called Detective Martinez from an untraceable phone Tyler had provided. Detective Martinez, this is Marcus Chen. I think we need to talk. Mr. Chen, where are you? We've been trying to reach you for 3 days. I'm somewhere safe, and I have information about Henderson Properties and Meridian Development that you need to see. There was a long pause. What kind of information? The kind that explains why families like the Morrisons disappear when they refuse to sell their houses. The kind that connects city officials to a conspiracy that makes your investigation of the Hells Angels look like a parking violation. Another pause, longer this time. I'm listening. Not over the phone, but if you're serious about protecting this community, meet me tomorrow night at the old grain elevator on River Road. Come alone, and bring someone from the FBI if you can, because what I'm about to show you is going to require federal intervention. After he ended the call, Marcus sat on Maria's front porch watching the sunset paint the cornfields gold. Emma ran up to him, her face flushed with excitement and barn cat fur clinging to her clothes. Daddy, Maria says there might be baby kittens in the hayloft. Can we go look? After dinner, princess. Emma settled beside him on the porch swing, her head finding its familiar place against his shoulder. I like it here, Daddy. It feels safe. It is safe, sweetheart, and we're going to make sure our home is safe too. With the motorcycle friends? With all our friends. Sometimes grown-ups have to work together to protect the things that matter. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this with the serious concentration she brought to all of life's mysteries. Is that what Mommy would want us to do? The question pierced Marcus's heart with its innocence and insight. Yes, princess. I think Mommy would want us to stand up for our neighbors just like she always did. Then that's what we'll do. As the stars emerged overhead and Maria called them in for dinner, Marcus realized that Emma had understood the truth more clearly than any of the adults. This wasn't about revenge or territory or even justice in any legal sense. This was about the simple recognition that some things were worth fighting for, and that family, whether bound by blood or choice, was the most important thing of all.
Tomorrow he would begin the most dangerous phase of his life, walking a tightrope between law and crime, between protection and destruction. But tonight, on a farmhouse porch, with his daughter's laughter mixing with the evening breeze, Marcus Chen felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. The profound peace that came from knowing exactly who you were and what you stood for. The war for his neighborhood would be won or lost in the coming weeks, but the war for his soul was already over, decided in favor of the man his wife and daughter deserved him to be. The meeting with Detective Martinez changed everything. Marcus arrived at the grain elevator on River Road carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would either save their neighborhood or get them all killed.
The detective wasn't alone. He'd brought Agent Sarah Reeves from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, a woman whose sharp eyes and careful questions suggested she'd seen enough corporate malfeasance to recognize the real thing when it appeared. Under the stark glare of portable floodlights, Marcus spread 3 years of documentation across makeshift tables. Bank records showing suspicious transfers from Meridian to city officials, recordings of Henderson Properties agents threatening elderly residents, architectural plans revealing the true scope of the casino development, and most damning of all, a recorded conversation Tyler had obtained through means Marcus preferred not to examine too closely. Meridian executives discussing the Morrison solution and debating which other families might require similar treatment. "Jesus Christ," Agent Reeves whispered, studying photographs of the Morrison family's abandoned house. "How long has this been going on?" 3 years of systematic corruption, 6 months since they started eliminating people who wouldn't cooperate, and all of it leading up to a casino resort that would generate billions in revenue for Meridian while destroying an entire community. Detective Martinez looked like a man watching his worldview collapse in real time. "Half the people on these payroll lists are friends of mine. City Councilman Rodriguez, Inspector Williams, Bank President Morrison." "Morrison," Agent Reeves interrupted. "Any relation to the family that disappeared?" "His brother," Martinez said quietly. "Paul Morrison fought the sale of his house for 8 months. His brother, the bank president, would have known every detail of his financial situation, every weakness that could be exploited." The implications hung in the air like smoke. Marcus watched the 2 law enforcement officers process the scope of the conspiracy, the depth of betrayal that had infected every level of local government. This wasn't just about real estate development. It was about the systematic destruction of democracy itself, corrupted from within by people who viewed human communities as obstacles to profit. "What do you need from us?" Agent Reeves asked finally. "Protection for the families who are still resisting, arrests of the people responsible, and justice for the Morrisons and whoever else Meridian has silenced." Marcus paused, choosing his next words carefully. "And immunity for the people who helped gather this evidence." Martinez studied him with new respect. The Hells Angels. Community members who risk their lives to protect their neighbors. Whatever you think about their methods, they're the only reason any of this evidence exists. Agent Reeves was already on her phone, calling in federal resources that would transform their small-town fight into a major corruption investigation. As Marcus listened to her coordinate with attorneys and forensic accountants, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a hope that the system might actually work, that justice might be more than a fairy tale told to children. But hope was a dangerous emotion in a war that had already claimed lives. The attack came 3 days later, when Marcus was attending what was supposed to be a routine city council meeting. He'd surfaced publicly as the leader of Citizens for Neighborhood Preservation, presenting a legal challenge to Meridian's development permits while Agent Reeves worked behind the scenes to build her federal case. Marcus was addressing the council when the lights went out, and in the darkness that followed, he heard the whisper of suppressed gunfire and the sound of bodies hitting the floor. Someone grabbed his arm with iron strength, pulling him behind the council podium as bullets shattered the windows above their heads. "Stay down." Danny Hoffman's voice was barely audible over the chaos. "They're not just trying to scare you this time." The building had been surrounded by Meridian's private security contractors, men who'd learned their trade in foreign wars before bringing those skills home to serve corporate interests. But they'd underestimated the Hells Angels' own military experience. Tank and Jimmy had positioned themselves in the upper floors, turning the meeting into a carefully orchestrated trap. The firefight lasted 7 minutes. When the emergency lights flickered on, 4 of Meridian's men lay dead or wounded, while the Hells Angels had only suffered minor injuries. Marcus found himself crouched behind the podium with Danny, both of them covered in plaster dust and the bitter smell of gunpowder.
"This is it," Danny said quietly. "They just declared war on a federal witness in front of 50 civilians. There's no going back from this." Marcus nodded, understanding that their careful legal strategy had just been replaced by something far more immediate and dangerous. Meridian had abandoned all pretense of legitimacy, revealing themselves as the criminal organization they'd always been, beneath the corporate facade. The FBI response was swift and overwhelming. Within hours, federal agents were arresting city officials, freezing Meridian's assets, and placing key witnesses in protective custody. This investigation took months of dangerous work to expose the truth. If you're invested in seeing how this David versus Goliath battle ends, please subscribe and hit the notification bell, and don't forget to share this with someone who believes in fighting for justice. Agent Reeves coordinated the operation from a command center that had been established in the high school gymnasium, transforming the space where Emma attended art classes into the headquarters of a major federal investigation. But the most important battle was still being fought in the court of public opinion. Marcus found himself at the center of a media storm, his story of corporate corruption and community resistance spreading far beyond their small town. National news crews descended like locusts, turning their quiet streets into a stage for debates about corporate power, government corruption, and the price of standing up to forces that seemed unstoppable. It was Emma who provided the moment that changed everything. She was being interviewed by a sympathetic reporter outside their temporary housing when she said, with the clear honesty that only children possess, "The motorcycle friends aren't scary. The scary people are the ones who wanted to hurt Mrs. Henderson and make families disappear. My daddy and his friends stopped the scary people." The video went viral within hours. Emma's words, combined with footage of the destroyed council chamber and interviews with elderly residents like Mrs. Henderson, transformed the narrative from a story about biker violence into something far more powerful. A tale of ordinary people protecting their community against corporate predators. The legal resolution came faster than anyone had expected. Faced with overwhelming evidence and national media attention, Meridian's executives began cooperating with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. The casino development was permanently canceled. City officials were arrested or forced to resign, and most importantly, the Morrison family's fate was finally revealed. They'd been murdered and buried in a construction site that was now being excavated by FBI forensic teams. But for Marcus, the real resolution came in smaller, more personal moments. It came when Mrs. Henderson's roof leaked during a thunderstorm, and she called him instead of a contractor, trusting him to coordinate repairs. It came when other neighborhoods began forming their own citizens for preservation groups, using the organizational model he'd developed to resist similar corporate takeovers. It came when Emma started school again, no longer carrying the weight of unspoken fears about losing their home. Most powerfully, it came the day Emma asked if she could visit Tyler in the hospital, where he was recovering from complications related to his original injuries. They found Tyler in physical therapy, working with grim determination to regain full mobility in his injured leg. The sight of Emma's bright face in the doorway transformed his expression from pain to pure joy. "Hey there, little warrior," Tyler said, his voice still rough but warm with affection. "How's the neighborhood guardian doing?" "We won," Emma announced with 8-year-old certainty. "The scary people went to jail, and Mrs. Henderson got her roof fixed, and nobody has to move away." Tyler's laugh was like music in the sterile hospital room. "That's right, we did win. Thanks to your daddy and all the brave people who stood up when it mattered." Marcus watched his daughter chat with the young man whose motorcycle accident had started this entire journey, and felt the profound sense of completion when seemingly random events revealed their deeper purpose. Tyler's crash hadn't been an accident. It had been fate intervening to bring together the people who could save their community. Agent Reeves arrived as visiting hours were ending, carrying flowers for Tyler and wearing an expression Marcus had rarely seen: peaceful satisfaction
mixed with paternal pride. "How are you holding up, son?" Danny asked, settling his massive frame into the hospital chair with surprising gentleness. "Better every day. The doctors say I'll be back on my bike by spring. Think the neighborhood can handle having me back on the road?" "I think the neighborhood is lucky to have you," Marcus said, meaning every word. "All of you." Danny studied him for a moment. "You know this doesn't end here, right? Meridian was just one company, one threat. There will be others. People who see communities like ours as resources to be exploited rather than families to be protected."
I know. And you're okay with that? With being the kind of man who stands between predators and the innocent? Marcus thought of Sarah's hands teaching Emma to plant flowers, of the cardinal that still visited their backyard fence, of the way his daughter's laughter could transform any space into something sacred. He thought of Mrs. Henderson's cures of gratitude, of the Morrison family's tragic fate, of the dozens of other families who were sleeping safely in their homes tonight because a group of unlikely allies had refused to surrender to forces that seemed unstoppable. Marcus said, "But I think she was only partly right. Sometimes kindness needs to be backed up by people who are willing to do hard things to protect it." Danny's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "Brother, I think your wife would be proud of the man you've become." That evening, Marcus and Emma returned to their house for the first time in 2 weeks. The neighborhood looked different somehow, not just because of the federal agents still processing evidence and the news crews gradually packing up their equipment, but because of something deeper. The community that had been under siege had discovered its own strength, its capacity to protect itself against forces that had seemed unstoppable. Mrs. Henderson was working in her garden when they pulled into their driveway, her movements careful but determined as she planted bulbs that would bloom in the spring. She waved when she saw them, her smile carrying the warmth of someone who had learned that angels sometimes wore leather jackets and rode motorcycles. Inside the house, Marcus found a package waiting on the kitchen table, a photo album that Maria had assembled during their stay at the farmhouse. The pictures captured moments he'd barely been aware of at the time. Emma feeding chickens, Tank teaching her to whistle, Danny and Tyler planning strategy while she colored at the same table. The entire extended family of biological and chosen relatives gathered around Maria's dinner table. But it was the last photo that stopped his breath. Someone had captured the moment during the final city council meeting when Emma had run to him, just before the lights went out and the shooting started. In the picture, she was looking up at him with absolute trust, while behind them, barely visible in the background, the shadowy figures of Danny, Tank, and Jimmy stood guard. The image perfectly captured what Marcus had learned over these past weeks, that families come in all forms, that protection requires both courage and compassion, and that sometimes the people society calls dangerous are the only ones willing to stand between the innocent and those who would destroy them. Emma found him staring at the photo, tears streaming down his face. "Why are you crying, Daddy? Are you sad?" Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her close while he searched for words that could explain the complex mixture of grief and gratitude that filled his heart. "No, Princess, I'm not sad. I'm grateful." "For what?" "For you, for our friends, for learning that family isn't just about who you're related to. It's about who you'd fight for, who you'd protect, who you'd trust with the most important things in your life." Emma considered this with the serious concentration she brought to all of life's important questions. Like how Tank would protect me even though he's not my uncle? And how Tyler got hurt but still helped us anyway? And how Danny is scary to bad people but nice to us? Exactly like that. And how the motorcycle friends became our guardian angels? Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Out of the mouths of babes came wisdom that adults spent lifetimes learning to understand. Yes, sweetheart. Our guardian angels. As they sat together in their kitchen, safe in the home they'd almost lost, Marcus thought about legacy, the inheritance every parent hopes to leave their children. Sarah had given Emma the gift of believing in goodness,
in the power of kindness to transform the world. But Marcus realized he'd given her something equally valuable. The knowledge that goodness sometimes needed to be defended, that kindness sometimes required courage, and that the most important battles were fought not for glory or profit, but for the simple right of families to live in peace. Outside their window, the cardinal returned to its perch on the fence, its red feathers bright against the gathering dusk. Sarah's presence felt especially strong in that moment, as if she were offering her approval of the man he'd become and the choices he'd made, and that he should always remember the importance of fighting for the goodness Sarah had seen in him.
Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be testimony to give, communities to organize, vigilance to maintain against future threats. But tonight, with Emma's warm weight against his shoulder and the knowledge that their guardian angels were watching over them, Marcus Chen felt something he hadn't experienced since his wife's death. The profound peace that comes from knowing you fought the good fight and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. The battle for their neighborhood was over. The battle for their souls and the soul of their community had been won. 1 year later, the morning sun cast long shadows across the community garden where Sarah Chin Elementary School had been built on the former site of Meridian's planned casino. Marcus stood at the edge of the playground, watching Emma chase her classmates across equipment that gleamed with newness and possibility. The school board had voted unanimously to name the new facility after his late wife, recognizing her years of service to the community and the sacrifice her family had made to protect it. "She would have loved this," a familiar voice said behind him. Marcus turned to find Tyler Hoffman approaching, his leather jacket replaced by a simple flannel shirt and jeans. The president of the local Hells Angels chapter looked older than his years, but his eyes carried the peaceful satisfaction of a man who had seen justice served and his family protected. "Sarah always said education was the best weapon against ignorance and cruelty," Marcus replied. "I think she'd approve of the symbolism. Children learning and playing where predators plan to exploit the vulnerable." They stood in comfortable silence. Two fathers, watching the next generation claim the future their sacrifice had secured. The friendship between them had deepened over the months following Meridian's defeat, built on shared purpose and the recognition that family came in many forms. "Tyler's doing well at State," Danny said, referring to his son's full scholarship to study criminal justice at the State University. "Says he wants to come back here after graduation, maybe work with Agent Reeves on other corruption cases." "That boy has found his calling. The accident that brought us together might have been the best thing that ever happened to him." "To all of us," Danny corrected. "Speaking of which, Tank wanted me to ask if Emma's still planning to enter the science fair. He's been working on that volcano project with her for weeks." Marcus smiled, thinking of the gentle giant who had become one of Emma's most devoted mentors. Tank had discovered a gift for explaining complex concepts to children, his massive hands surprisingly delicate as he helped her mix chemicals and build structures. The sight of him patiently teaching a group of neighborhood kids about engineering principles had become a regular weekend occurrence. "She's excited about it, though I think she's more interested in the excuse to spend time with her Uncle Tank than in actually winning. That's what family does. We show up for each other, whether it's science fairs or federal investigations." The reference to federal investigations brought Marcus's attention to the morning newspaper tucked under Danny's arm. The headline read, "Meridian Executives Sentenced. CEO Gets 20 Years for Racketeering." It was the final chapter in a legal saga that had sent shockwaves through corporate America, establishing precedents for prosecuting companies that use violence to achieve business objectives. "Justice served," Marcus said, though the satisfaction was tempered by the knowledge that the Morrisons would never see their vindication. "And a message sent to anyone else who thinks they can terrorize communities for profit." Danny's expression grew serious. "But there's something else. Agent Reeves called yesterday. They're getting reports from 3 other states about similar schemes, corporations using intimidation and worse to clear the way for large developments. She wants to know if we'd be interested in consulting. Marcus felt a familiar stirring in his chest, the call to purpose that had defined the past year of his life. Citizens for Neighborhood Preservation had grown from a local organization into a national movement, with Marcus serving as its primary spokesman and strategic coordinator. They'd helped communities in 7 states resist corporate takeovers, always working within legal boundaries, but backed by the implicit protection of their motorcycle-riding allies. The mention of Maria brought warmth to Marcus's heart. The woman who had sheltered them during their darkest hours had become like a grandmother to Emma, filling a role that Sarah's mother, who lived 3,000 miles away, couldn't adequately fulfill. The extended family that had grown around them over the past year included not just the Hells Angels and their relatives, but a network of neighbors, teachers, shopkeepers, and community activists who understood that protecting one meant protecting all. "I'll think about it," Marcus said, though he already knew his answer. The man who had once wanted nothing more than to live quietly with his daughter had discovered that peace was something that had to be actively maintained, defended against those who would destroy it for profit. "Take your time. But remember, this isn't just about helping other communities. It's about making sure what happened here never happens again." After Danny left to attend to his legitimate business, he'd bought a motorcycle repair shop that had become the informal community center for their neighborhood. Marcus walked through the streets where the battle for their community's soul had been fought and won. Mrs. Henderson's house gleamed with fresh paint, her garden blooming with flowers that would survive the coming winter. The Morrison family's former home had been purchased by a young couple with twin toddlers who filled the yard with laughter and bicycles and the ordinary chaos of family life. At the corner grocery store, Mr. Patel, who had been one of the early supporters of Citizens for Neighborhood Preservation, waved from behind the counter where he was helping a customer. The store had been targeted for closure by Meridian's plan, but now it bustled with the business of residents who no longer feared their neighborhood was doomed. The changes weren't all physical. There was something different in the way people moved through these streets, in the confidence with which children played and elderly residents tended their gardens. It was the difference between a community under siege and one that knew it could protect itself. Marcus found Emma at Rico's house, where she was helping his wife Carmen prepare lunch for the weekly gathering of the extended family. These Sunday meals had become tradition, bringing together biological relatives and chosen family around tables that groaned under the weight of food and laughter. "Daddy!" Emma ran to him, her face bright with the joy that had returned in full measure over the past year. "Carmen is teaching me to make tamales. Look, I can fold them now." Marcus examined his daughter's handiwork with the serious attention it deserved. "These look perfect, Princess. Carmen, thank you for teaching her." Carmen smiled, her hands never pausing in their quick, practiced movements. "She's a natural, very patient, very careful, just like her mama must have been." The mention of Sarah no longer brought the sharp stab of grief it once had. Time and the support of their chosen family had transformed the pain into something gentler, a warm ache that spoke of love that transcended physical presence. "Sarah was the most patient person I ever knew," Marcus agreed. "Emma definitely inherited that from her. And the stubbornness from you. Good kind of stubborn, the kind that doesn't quit when quitting would be easier." As the afternoon progressed, the house filled with the familiar faces that had become central to their lives. Tank arrived with a new batch of experiments for his ongoing science education project with Emma. Jimmy brought his guitar and the gentle voice that could transform any gathering into a sing-along. Tyler appeared with his girlfriend Sarah, named for Marcus's late wife, a coincidence that felt like blessing rather than chance, both of them radiant with the energy of young people building a future together. Danny was the last to arrive, carrying a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "What's this?" Marcus asked, accepting the gift with curiosity. "Something I've been working on." "Open it."
Inside was a photo album, but not like the one Maria had assembled the previous year. This was a professional production, leather-bound and filled with photographs that told the story of their community's transformation. The first image showed the eviction notice fluttering against Marcus's fence, rain-soaked and ominous. The last showed Emma cutting the ribbon at the dedication ceremony for Sarah Chen Elementary School, surrounded by friends and family whose love had made the victory possible. But the inscription on the inside cover made Marcus's throat tighten with emotion. For Emma Chen, so she'll always remember that guardian angels come in many forms, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought by ordinary people who refuse to surrender to extraordinary evil, with love from her chosen family. Marcus struggled for words adequate to express what the gift meant. This is incredible. Every child should know the story of how her family fought to protect her future, and every community should remember that they have the power to protect themselves if they're willing to stand together. As the evening drew to a close and their extended family began to disperse to their own homes, Marcus and Emma walked hand in hand through streets that belonged to them again. The cardinal was waiting on their fence, its red feathers brilliant against the darkening sky. "Daddy," Emma said as they paused to watch the bird, "do you think Mommy can see us from heaven?" "I think if anyone could figure out how to watch over the people she loved, it would be your mother." Emma considered this with the serious concentration she brought to all of life's important questions. "I think she sent the guardian angels to help us when we needed them most." Marcus looked at his daughter, now 9 years old, confident and curious and unafraid of the world, and realized she was right. Sarah's greatest gift hadn't been the love she'd given them during her life, but the courage she instilled in them to fight for that love after she was gone. "I think you're absolutely right, Princess." They stood together in the gathering dusk, father and daughter, surrounded by the community they'd helped to save and the extended family they'd chosen to love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Marcus had already decided to accept Agent Reeves's offer to help other communities resist corporate predators. There would be travel, danger, the ongoing work of protecting the innocent from those who saw them as obstacles to profit. But tonight, in the garden Sarah had planted, and the neighborhood their guardian angels had defended, Marcus Chen felt the profound peace that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for. He was a father, a protector, a man who had learned that sometimes the only way to preserve what you love is to be willing to fight for it. The cardinal took flight, soaring into the darkening sky with wings that caught the last light of day. Sarah's presence was strong in that moment, not as grief, but as blessing, as approval of the man he'd become and the life he was building for their daughter. Some stories end with victory, others end with understanding. The best ones end with the recognition that every ending is just a new beginning in disguise, and that love, real love, is the only force strong enough to transform ordinary people into heroes. As they walked toward their house, toward dinner and homework and the simple rituals of family life, Marcus understood that this was his legacy. Not the corporate executives he'd helped convict, or the communities he'd helped save, but the daughter walking beside him, confident in the knowledge that she was loved and protected by people who would never let her face the darkness alone. The battle for their neighborhood was over. The battle for justice would continue. But the war for Emma's future, for her right to grow up in a world where kindness was backed by courage and love was defended by strength, that war had been won. And in winning it, Marcus had discovered the most important truth of all, that guardian angels weren't mythical beings with wings and halos. They were ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things when the people they loved most needed them most. The mortgage was paid, the community was safe, the family, biological and chosen, was strong. Sarah Chen's husband and daughter were home. 5 years later. The thunderstorm that rolled across the Midwest that September evening brought with it memories and possibilities in equal measure. Marcus stood in the conference room of the Citizens for Neighborhood Preservation headquarters, a converted warehouse that had once stored grain and now housed the nerve center of a national movement, watching lightning illuminate maps that showed their expanding influence across 37 states. Emma, now 14, and possessed of her mother's keen intelligence and her father's stubborn determination, sat at the conference table reviewing case files with the methodical precision of someone who'd grown up understanding that details mattered when lives hung in the balance. She insisted on attending tonight's emergency meeting, despite Marcus's reservations about exposing her to some of the darker realities of their work.
"What's the timeline?" Danny asked. "3 families have disappeared in the past 6 months, Agent Reeves replied. All of them were fighting eviction proceedings. All of them had complained about harassment and threats. And all of them vanished without a trace just days before court hearings that might have stopped the development." Tank, now 48 and serving as the club's sergeant-at-arms, leaned forward with the intensity that had made him Emma's most devoted protector and teacher. "Same corporate structure as Meridian? Worse, this is called Phoenix Development Corporation, and they've learned from Meridian's mistakes. Shell companies within shell companies, international financing, politicians bought and paid for at every level of government. They're not just trying to clear a neighborhood, they're creating a model for corporate colonization of American communities." Marcus felt the familiar stirring of purpose that had defined the past 5 years of his life. Citizens for Neighborhood Preservation had grown from a local organization into a movement that helped communities across the nation resist corporate predators. But Phoenix represented something new, a level of sophistication and ruthlessness that required all of their experience and resources to combat. "What kind of support can the FBI provide?" Marcus asked. "Limited," Agent Reeves admitted. "Phoenix has political protection at levels we can't easily penetrate. We can investigate after people disappear, but we can't prevent the disappearances without probable cause that our superiors won't authorize." "So we're back to being the last line of defense," Danny said, but without bitterness. It was simply a statement of reality, the recognition that justice sometimes required action that existed outside official channels. Emma spoke for the first time since the meeting began, her voice carrying the calm authority that reminded Marcus so powerfully of Sarah. "What about the families who are still there, the ones who haven't disappeared yet?" 17 households, mostly elderly residents, single parents, people without the resources to relocate even if they wanted to. Phoenix is systematically targeting the most vulnerable first. "Then we protect them," Emma said matter-of-factly. "All of them. Whatever it takes." Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with concern as he watched his daughter engage with the realities of their work. She'd grown up in this world, understanding from an early age that her family's mission involved protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. But she'd also grown up seeing the costs, the sleepless nights when he was traveling to help other communities, the security measures that had become routine parts of their daily life, the way their extended family lived with the constant awareness that their work made them targets. "Emma," Marcus said gently, "this isn't a decision for you to make. You're 14 years old. You should be thinking about school and friends, not corporate conspiracies and missing families." Emma's smile was so much like Sarah's that it made his chest ache. "Daddy, I've been thinking about corporate conspiracies since I was 8 years old, and my friends are Tank and Tyler and Carmen and all the people in this room who taught me that family means standing up for each other." She paused, her expression growing serious. "Besides, I'm not asking to go to Detroit with guns and motorcycles. I'm saying we have resources Phoenix doesn't know about, resources that could make all the difference." "What kind of resources?" Danny asked, recognizing the calculating look in Emma's eyes. "Social media, national attention, the kind of publicity that makes it impossible for people to disappear quietly." Emma pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the fluency of her generation. "Phoenix is counting on operating in shadows, on intimidating people who have no voice and no platform. But what if we gave them both?" The screen filled with Emma's social media profiles, accounts that had grown from her early posts about their neighborhood's victory over Meridian into a platform that reached hundreds of thousands of followers. She'd become the unofficial spokesperson for a generation that refused to accept corporate domination of their communities, and her voice carried weight that surprised even seasoned activists. I could go to Detroit, not as backup for a covert operation, but as a journalist documenting what's happening to these families. Live streams, interviews, real-time coverage that makes it impossible for Phoenix to operate in secret. Agent Reeves leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. It's not a bad idea. Phoenix's power depends on invisibility. Public attention could force them to change tactics, maybe even abandon the project entirely. Absolutely not, Marcus said firmly. Emma, you're not going anywhere near Detroit. These people have killed families. They won't hesitate to hurt a teenage girl if she becomes a threat to their operation. But they won't hurt someone with a national platform who's being watched by federal agents. And besides, I won't be alone. Tank could come with me as security, Tyler could handle the technical side of the documentation, and Carmen could coordinate with local community groups.
Marcus looked around the table at the faces of people who had become his family over the past 5 years. Tank, whose gentle strength had helped Emma grow into the confident young woman she'd become. Tyler, now 21 and working as a paralegal while finishing his criminal justice degree, whose accident had started this entire journey. Carmen, Rico's wife, who had become like a second mother to Emma and whose organizational skills had been crucial to their success in other campaigns. They were all nodding, seeing the wisdom in Emma's proposal despite Marcus's protective instincts. "The girl's right," Tank said in his rumbling voice. "Phoenix is counting on fear and secrecy. Take away both and they lose their primary weapons." "Plus," Tyler added, "Emma's not 8 years old anymore. She's been part of this fight her entire life. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that she's earned the right to choose how she wants to contribute." Marcus felt the weight of fatherhood pressing down on him like a physical force. Every instinct screamed at him to keep Emma safe, to protect her from the dangers that came with their work. But he also recognized the truth in what Tyler had said. Emma had grown up in this world, had learned its lessons, had developed skills and perspectives that could be invaluable in protecting other families. "What would Sarah want?" Danny asked quietly, voicing the question that always lurked beneath Marcus's most difficult decisions. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering Sarah's hands teaching Emma to plant flowers, her voice explaining that kindness was the only magic that really worked. But he also remembered her fierce protectiveness when it came to children, her willingness to fight any battle if it meant keeping innocents safe. "Sarah would want to protect those families," Marcus said finally, "but she'd also want Emma to be safe." "Then we make sure she's safe," Tank said. "Full security detail, federal oversight, media attention that makes it impossible for anything to happen to her without the whole world knowing about it." Agent Reeves nodded. "I can coordinate with the Detroit field office, make sure there's official protection, even if we can't officially investigate Phoenix's activities." Marcus studied his daughter's face, seeing determination there that reminded him powerfully of the woman who had shaped both their lives. Emma had grown up in this world, had learned its lessons, had developed skills and perspectives that could be invaluable in protecting other families. "If we do this, we do it right," Marcus said slowly. "Full security, constant communication, and the first sign of real danger, you're on the first plane home. Understood?" Emma's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Understood, Daddy." The planning session that followed lasted until dawn, producing a strategy that combined Emma's social media expertise with the tactical experience of their extended family. Tank would serve as her bodyguard and mentor, his imposing presence deterring casual threats, while his gentle nature helped her connect with the families they'd be trying to protect. Tyler would handle technical coordination, using his legal training to document evidence that could support eventual prosecutions. Carmen would work with local community groups, building the grassroots networks that were essential to long-term success. Danny and Marcus would remain behind initially, coordinating resources and preparing for the escalation that would inevitably come when Phoenix realized they were under attack. "One more thing,"
Emma said as the meeting was breaking up. "I want to do this in Mom's name, not just to honor her memory, but because what she believed, that kindness was real magic, is exactly what these families need right now." Marcus felt tears sting his eyes as he looked at his daughter, seeing so clearly the woman she was becoming. Sarah's death had left a hole in their lives that could never be filled, but Emma's growth into someone who embodied her mother's values while developing her own strength had transformed that loss into something that honored Sarah's legacy. "Your mother would be so proud of you," Marcus said, pulling Emma into an embrace that carried 5 years of love and protection and the bittersweet recognition that she was no longer the child he'd been trying so desperately to shield from the world's darkness. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in the Detroit airport watching his daughter board a plane to a city where families disappeared and corporations eliminated inconvenient obstacles to profit. Tank's massive frame beside her provided some comfort, as did the knowledge that Tyler and Carmen were already on the ground establishing security protocols and media connections. But as the plane disappeared into the autumn sky, Marcus felt the familiar weight of uncertainty that comes with loving someone enough to let them risk themselves for others. Danny appeared at his shoulder, carrying coffee and the kind of understanding that only came from years of shared battles. "She'll be fine," Danny said. "Tank will die before he lets anything happen to her, and Emma has more street sense than most adults I know."
"This is impossible," Marcus whispered. "The city would never approve something like this. There are zoning laws, community input requirements." "There are also city council members with gambling debts, a mayor facing bankruptcy, and a planning commission that's been systematically bought and paid for over the past 3 years." Tyler's finger traced connections on a flowchart that read like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Meridian doesn't just want to build a casino. They want to own the entire local government that regulates it. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Marcus recognized names from the documents: the bank president who'd been so eager to foreclose on his mortgage, the city inspector who'd condemned Mrs. Henderson's roof as structurally unsound just weeks before they'd repaired it, the real estate agents who'd been pressuring elderly residents with lowball offers and dire warnings about neighborhood decline. "How did you get all this?" Marcus asked. Tyler's smile was sharp as broken glass. "You think the Hells Angels survived this long by playing by other people's rules? We've got friends in places you wouldn't expect, and enemies who don't realize we know who they are." He leaned back in his chair, wincing slightly from his injuries. "The thing is, Mr. Chen, this isn't just about money. It's about power. The kind of power that can make families disappear if they become inconvenient." "What do you mean?" "Remember the Morrison family? Lived over on Oak Street, had that big German shepherd that barked at everyone. They were fighting the sale of their house, threatened to go to the newspapers about Henderson Properties' tactics." Marcus nodded. The Morrisons had vanished 6 months ago, their house sold at auction after they'd supposedly defaulted on their mortgage and fled to parts unknown. "They didn't leave voluntarily," Tyler said quietly, "and they're not coming back." The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought of Emma sleeping upstairs, innocent and trusting, and felt something cold and murderous unfurl in his chest. "You're saying they were killed?" "I'm saying they became inconvenient to people who make inconvenient problems go away. The kind of people who don't care if you're a good father, or a loving husband, or someone who just wants to live in peace. The kind of people who see human beings as obstacles to profit margins." Marcus stood and walked to the window, staring out at the street where Tyler crashed his motorcycle what felt like a lifetime ago. The neighborhood looked peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness, but now he could see it differently. Not as a collection of homes where families built their lives, but as a battlefield where forces of greed and power were systematically destroying everything that mattered. "What does your father want from me?" Marcus asked. "The same thing you want, to protect the people who can't protect themselves. But also something more. You saved my life, Marcus.
In our world, that creates bonds that go deeper than law, deeper than convenience. You're family now, whether you want to be or not. And if I don't want to be? Tyler was quiet for a long moment. Then, you pack up Emma and run, tonight, before they realize how much you know and decide you're too dangerous to leave alive. The choice hung in the air between them like smoke, visible and inescapable. Marcus thought of Sarah's last words in the hospital, her hands gripping his with surprising strength as she made him promise to keep their daughter safe, to raise her with the values they'd shared, to never let the darkness of the world extinguish the light in Emma's eyes. But he also thought of Mrs. Henderson's tears of gratitude, of the other elderly residents who were being systematically terrorized into abandoning their homes, of the Morrison family and whatever happened to them in some room where screaming wouldn't be heard. If I stay, if I help, what exactly are we talking about? What would you need me to do? Tyler's expression grew serious. Legal things first. You're clean, Marcus. No record, solid reputation, the kind of person judges and juries trust. We need someone who can gather evidence that will stand up in court, who can speak for the community without the automatic prejudice my father and his brothers face. And illegal things? We need someone who can get close to the people behind this. Someone they wouldn't suspect, who could document their activities, maybe even wear a wire if it came to that. Tyler's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And if it comes down to protecting innocent people from monsters who use murder as a business tool, well, we need someone who understands that sometimes good people have to do hard things to stop evil from winning. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling Sarah's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. What would she want him to do? She dedicated her life to protecting children, to standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. But she'd also made him promise to keep Emma safe above all else.
"Thank you, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, embracing Emma with the gentle strength of someone who understood the price of protecting others. "You've made your mother proud, and you've shown the world what real courage looks like." That evening, as they gathered around Carmen's dinner table for their traditional Sunday meal, Marcus looked around at the faces of people who had become his family through choice rather than blood. Emma sat between Tank and Tyler, animated and confident as she recounted her experiences in Detroit. Danny and Rico discussed plans for helping other communities facing similar threats. Carmen and Mrs. Henderson compared notes on gardening techniques and the proper way to make tamales. It was Tyler who raised his glass first, proposing a toast that captured the spirit of everything they'd built together. "To Sarah Chen," Tyler said, his voice carrying the weight of gratitude and memory, "who taught us that kindness was the only magic that really worked. And to Emma Chen, who showed us that sometimes you have to be brave enough to fight for that magic." To Sarah and Emma, the assembled family replied, their voices blending in harmony that spoke of bonds deeper than blood, stronger than circumstance, and more enduring than any force that might try to break them. As the evening wound down and their extended family began to disperse to their own homes, Marcus and Emma walked through the neighborhood that had started it all. The streets looked peaceful in the twilight, filled with the ordinary magic of families living their lives without fear. The cardinal was waiting on their fence, its red feathers brilliant against the darkening sky. 5 years of seasons had passed since Marcus had first noticed the bird, 5 years of battles fought and victories won, 5 years of watching his daughter grow into someone who embodied the best of both her parents while developing her own unique strength. "Daddy," Emma said as they paused to watch the cardinal, "do you think we'll ever be done? Will there ever be a time when families don't need protecting from people who see them as obstacles?" Marcus considered the question, thinking of all the communities they'd helped, all the families they'd saved, all the corporate predators they'd stopped. But he also thought of Phoenix Development Corporation, of the new threats that would inevitably emerge, of the eternal struggle between those who protected and those who exploited. I don't think we'll ever be completely done, Marcus said, honestly, but I think that's okay. The important thing isn't finishing the fight, it's making sure there are always people willing to stand up when standing up is necessary. Emma nodded, accepting this truth with the wisdom of someone who had grown up, understanding that some battles were worth fighting, regardless of whether they could ever be completely won. Then we'll keep standing up, she said simply, all of us, together. As they walked toward their house, toward dinner and homework, and the simple rituals of family life that had been threatened but never broken, Marcus felt the profound satisfaction that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for. He was a father who had raised a daughter strong enough to protect others. He was a friend who had found family in the most unlikely places. He was a guardian who understood that angels came in many forms, but always shared the same mission, protecting the innocent from those who would destroy them. The mortgage was paid. The community was safe. The family, biological and chosen, was stronger than ever. And somewhere in the evening sky, Sarah Chen's spirit watched over them all, proud of the man her husband had become and the woman their daughter was growing into, knowing that her legacy lived on in their courage to stand for kindness in a world that too often rewarded cruelty. The battle for their neighborhood was over. The battle for Emma's future had been won. The war for justice would continue, one family at a time, one community at a time, one act of courage at a time. Guardian angels, after all, never retired from the work of protecting those they loved. Thank you for taking the time to experience Marcus and Emma's incredible journey. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more true stories of courage, family, and communities that refuse to give up. Your engagement helps these important stories reach the people who need to hear them most. 10 years later, the graduation ceremony at State University took place under a canopy of ancient oak trees, their leaves rustling with the promise of summer storms. Marcus sat in the front row, his hair now more silver than black, watching his daughter stride across the stage to receive her degree in journalism and social justice. At 24, Emma had grown into a woman who combined Sarah's gentle wisdom with her own fierce determination, becoming a voice that commanded respect from corporate boardrooms to congressional hearing rooms.
Emma Chen, the dean announced, his voice carrying across the crowd of proud families. Graduating summa cum laude, recipient of the university's Award for Excellence in Investigative Journalism and founder of the National Guardian Angels Network. The applause was thunderous, led by the section where their extended family had claimed an entire row. Danny Hoffman, now sporting a distinguished gray beard, whistled with the enthusiasm of a proud grandfather. Tank, his massive frame somehow squeezed into a suit that made him look like a gentle giant dressed for church, wiped tears from his eyes without shame. Tyler, now 26 and working as a federal prosecutor specializing in corporate crime, stood with his wife Sarah. They'd married 3 years earlier in a ceremony that had felt like a reunion of everyone who'd ever been touched by their story. But it was the presence in the empty chair beside Marcus that felt most significant. He'd brought a framed photograph of Sarah, wanting her to be part of this moment, even though she'd never see their daughter become the woman she'd dreamed she could be. The photo showed Sarah in her kindergarten classroom, surrounded by children whose faces glowed with the same trust and joy that Emma now inspired in the communities she fought to protect. After the ceremony, as families scattered across the campus for celebrations and farewells, Marcus found himself standing with Emma beneath the same oak trees where he'd once carried her as a toddler during Sarah's treatment visits to the university hospital. The symmetry felt intentional, as if life were offering them a moment to recognize how far they'd traveled from those dark days when the future had seemed impossible to imagine. "I can't believe it's over," Emma said, adjusting the cap that kept threatening to slide off her carefully styled hair.
4 years of classes, internships, building the network. It feels like everything is just beginning. It is just beginning, I agreed. But you've built something incredible, Em. The Guardian Angels Network has helped save 37 communities in 12 states. That's not just beginning, that's already a legacy. Emma's smile carried the confident warmth that had become her trademark in the media appearances and congressional testimony that now filled her calendar. It's not my legacy, Daddy. It's our legacy. Every family we've helped, every community that's learned to protect itself, that started with you and the choice you made to save Tyler's life. Marcus thought about that rainy afternoon when a 16-year-old boy had crashed his motorcycle outside their house, setting in motion events that had transformed not just their lives, but the lives of thousands of families across the nation. The Guardian Angels Network had grown from their local citizens for neighborhood preservation into a sophisticated organization that combined legal advocacy, media strategy, and, when necessary, the kind of direct action that the original Hells Angels had perfected. "Your mother would be so proud," Marcus said, touching the photograph he'd carried throughout the ceremony. "Not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become." "I feel it with me sometimes," Emma said quietly, "especially when I'm scared. When I'm facing something that seems too big or too dangerous. It's like she's reminding me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Tank, who approached with the careful steps of a man trying not to trip over his own formal shoes. Behind him came the rest of their extended family, a collection of bikers, federal agents, community organizers, and neighborhood friends who had become the most important people in their lives. "Emma Chen, college graduate," Tank announced with a grin that transformed his scarred face into something beautiful. "I remember when you couldn't reach the kitchen counter without a step stool, and now you're giving speeches to Congress about corporate accountability." "You taught me well, Uncle Tank," Emma replied, using the title that had evolved naturally over the years of their relationship. "Remember the first science fair project we worked on together? You said the most important thing was to ask the right questions, not just find the easy answers." "Still true," Tank said, his voice carrying the gentle authority that had made him such an effective mentor to dozens of young people over the years. "So what questions are you asking now?" Emma's expression grew thoughtful as she considered the question that had been driving her work for the past several months. "I'm asking whether we've been thinking too small. We've gotten good at responding to threats, at helping communities fight back when corporations try to destroy them. But what if we could prevent the threats from emerging in the first place?" Danny, who had been listening with the tactical awareness that made him such an effective ally, stepped closer. "What kind of prevention are you thinking about?" "Systemic change," Emma said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had spent years thinking through complex problems. "We've been fighting individual battles against individual corporations, but the real problem is a system that allows those corporations to treat communities as disposable. What if we could change the system itself?" Agent Reeves, now retired from the FBI, but still serving as an unofficial advisor to the Guardian Angels Network, nodded approvingly. "You're talking about political action, campaign finance reform, regulatory changes, maybe even constitutional amendments to limit corporate power."
Exactly. And I think I know how to start. Emma pulled out her phone, scrolling to a document she'd been working on for months. "I've been offered a position with Senator Catherine Morrison, Paul Morrison's daughter, who went into politics after we helped expose what happened to her father's family. She's chairing a new Senate subcommittee on corporate accountability, and she wants me to serve as chief investigator." Marcus felt a surge of pride, mixed with concern. Politics was a dangerous game, especially for someone whose work had already made powerful enemies. What would that involve? Congressional hearings, subpoena power, the ability to compel testimony from corporate executives who've been hiding behind layers of legal protection. It would mean moving to Washington, taking on fights that could make Phoenix Development Corporation look like a minor nuisance. It would also mean becoming a much bigger target, Danny said, with the protective instincts that had made him such a devoted surrogate father to Emma. These people don't just buy politicians and intimidate families. At the federal level, they eliminate threats to national security. Emma's smile was sharp, as her mother's had been gentle. Then we'll have to make sure I'm too visible to eliminate quietly. That's what we learned in Detroit. Sunshine is the best disinfectant, and it's hard to make someone disappear when the whole world is watching. As they talked, other members of their extended family drifted closer, drawn by the kind of serious conversation that had become the hallmark of their gatherings. Rico and Carmen, now grandparents themselves, but still actively involved in community organizing. Jimmy, whose guitar had provided the soundtrack to countless strategy sessions and victory celebrations. Mrs. Henderson, now 93 and still tending her garden with the determination that had inspired their first victory. Tyler and his wife Sarah approached last, their 3-year-old daughter Charlotte bouncing in Tyler's arms with the energy that only small children possessed. Charlotte had become the princess of their extended family, spoiled by dozens of honorary aunts and uncles who saw in her the future they were fighting to protect. "Aunt Emma!" Charlotte called, her voice carrying the pure joy that made every gathering feel like a celebration. "I got your paper?" "I got my diploma, sweetheart," Emma said, taking the little girl from Tyler's arms with the practiced ease of someone who had helped raise half the children in their neighborhood. "It means I finished school, and now I can help even more families stay safe in their homes." Charlotte considered this with the serious concentration that reminded everyone of Emma at that age. "Like how Daddy helps send bad people to jail?" "Exactly like that," Emma agreed. "Sometimes grown-ups have to work together to make sure families can live safely and happily." "Will you be safe when you help other families?" Charlotte asked, with the innocence that cut straight to the heart of every adult concern. Emma exchanged glances with Marcus, both of them recognizing the weight of the question. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that some battles are worth the risk, that some causes demand sacrifice, that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to put yourself in danger? "I'll be as safe as I can be," Emma said finally, "and I'll have lots of friends helping to keep me safe, just like your daddy and Uncle Tank and Grandpa Marcus and everyone else in our family." "Promise?" Charlotte insisted with the absolute faith that children placed in the adults they trusted. "I promise to be careful, to be smart, and to always remember that I have a family worth coming home to," Emma said, her voice carrying the weight of an oath that everyone present understood. As the afternoon sun began to set, painting the campus in shades of gold and amber, their extended family gathered for one final photograph beneath the oak trees. Marcus positioned himself behind Emma, his hands on her shoulders, while Sarah's photograph occupied the place of honor in Emma's arms. Around them stood the men and women who had become their chosen family. Bikers and federal agents, community organizers and neighborhood friends, all united by the recognition that some bonds transcended blood and geography. Rico set up his camera with the careful precision he brought to all technical tasks, adjusting angles and lighting with the patience of someone who understood that some moments needed to be preserved exactly right. "Everyone ready?" Rico called out, his finger poised over the camera's timer. "Wait," Emma said, looking around at the faces of people who had shaped her life in ways she was still discovering. "I want to say something first." She handed Charlotte back to Tyler and stepped forward, her voice carrying across the gathering with the authority that had made her such an effective advocate for vulnerable communities. 10 years ago, my daddy made a choice to help a stranger who was hurt and bleeding in our street. That choice changed everything. Not just for our family,
but for hundreds of families we didn't even know existed yet. Today, I'm making my own choice to take our work to the next level, to fight for changes that could protect families we haven't even met yet. She paused, looking directly at Marcus with eyes that held both Sarah's gentleness and her own fierce determination. But the most important thing I've learned from all of you is that we're never fighting alone. Whatever comes next, congressional hearings, corporate retaliation, political battles that could take years to win, we'll face it together. Because that's what family does. That's what guardian angels do. The photograph that Tank captured in that moment would become one of Marcus's most treasured possessions, an image that perfectly captured the love and determination that had carried them through every battle, every victory, every moment when the future had seemed uncertain, but the bonds between them had remained unshakable. Later that evening, as their extended family gathered at Carmen's house for their traditional celebration dinner, Marcus found himself standing in the backyard where Emma had once built mud castles and chased fireflies. The cardinal was there, perched on the same fence where it had appeared all those years ago, its red feathers bright against the gathering dusk. Emma joined him, carrying a glass of wine and wearing the kind of peaceful expression that came after major life transitions. "Nervous about Washington?" Marcus asked. "Terrified," Emma admitted, with the honesty that had always characterized their relationship. "But also excited. For the first time, we'll have real power to make systemic changes, not just fight individual battles. Your mother always said you were destined for great things. She also said that great things weren't about power or position, they were about how many people you helped along the way." Emma smiled, watching the cardinal preen its feathers in the fading light. "I think she'd approve of what we're trying to do." Marcus nodded, remembering Sarah's voice on that last day in the hospital, making him promise to raise their daughter with the values they'd shared, to never let the darkness of the world extinguish the light in Emma's eyes. Looking at his daughter now, confident, compassionate, ready to take on battles that would have terrified him at her age, he knew he'd kept that promise. "She'd be proud of both of us," Marcus said, "but especially of you. You've become exactly the woman she dreamed you could be." As they stood together in the backyard where their story had begun, surrounded by the voices of family and friends celebrating inside the house, Marcus felt the profound satisfaction that comes from knowing you've lived up to the best of yourself. Emma was ready for the next phase of their fight, armed with education, experience, and the support of people who would die before they let her face the darkness alone. The cardinal took flight, soaring into the evening sky with wings that caught the last light of day. Sarah's presence was strong in that moment, not as grief, but as blessing, as the recognition that love transcended physical presence and that the values she'd instilled would continue to guide their family through whatever challenges lay ahead. Guardian angels, Marcus understood, weren't just protectors, they were teachers, showing each generation how to recognize what was worth defending and finding the courage to defend it. Emma was ready to become a teacher herself, to show other communities that they had the power to protect themselves against forces that seemed unstoppable. The work would continue, the battles would intensify, but the foundation they'd built together, love, courage, and the unshakable conviction that families deserve to live in safety and dignity, would endure whatever storms might come.